Welcome to the Lady Landlords Podcast, where we empower women to gain financial freedom through real estate investing. I'm your host, Becky Nova, founder of Lady Landlords. If you're ready to buy, manage, and grow your real estate investing portfolio, then let's get started. Welcome back to today's episode of the Lady Landlords Podcast. I am your host, Becky Nova, and today I'm going to be answering your questions from the Lady Landlords Facebook group all about pet policies. Today, we're going to be talking about not just pet policies, but also what to do with service animals and ESAs and all of those different conditions that always has our Lady Landlords community go wild when we talk about. So let's dive into this. One of the reasons why this is going to be so important is because it's important to understand what we legally can do when it comes to pets, okay? Not just pets, but also animals that act as service animals and also ESAs, which stands for emotional service animals. The caveat that I wanted to give here today is always make sure that you know your state and your local regulations, because there are going to be, we have federal guidelines called the Fair Housing Guidelines that really talk about what we cannot do when it comes to emotional support animals and service animals. So we're going to talk more about it from a federal perspective, but there are certain states, hello out there, those of mine that are landlords in California, but there are also some different municipalities and some different states that also have different regulations. So please do make sure that you look into that. But we're going to dive into ESAs, but we're also going to talk about just pet policies in general. Let's start with that. Our first question came in from Laura Garcia. Laura was asking, for those that rent to tenants with dogs, what breeds do you stay away from? So this just in general from a pet policy, you get to determine that. What's really great is you get to say, hey, I will accept pets or I will not accept pets. That's going to be something that you as a landlord really get to make that decision on. But you will often see that landlords will put conditions on those types of animals. For example, they might say pets okay, but you might see other people that'll say, well, cats are okay, dogs aren't. Dogs are okay, cats aren't. Or I'll accept dogs, but they have to be under 10 pounds. So like I'm a city person. That's something that you see very often here, that it's only smaller dogs. So you really get to control what breeds that you will accept, or even what animals that you accept, right? So with this, to answer your question about what breeds that you would want to stay away from, one of the things that's going to be most important are the breeds that your homeowner's insurance or your landlord policy says that you cannot rent to. There are a lot of breeds that are restricted under most insurances, not all insurances, but most insurances. Usually those are going to be mixed breeds or also what are considered your more aggressive breeds. So those are things that insurance companies have decided to put them on a we do not cover list. Those are what you want to stay away from, because if you rent to a tenant that has an animal that then is not covered under your policy and there's an incident, that's really going to cause a lot of problems for you. That is definitely what you want to be thinking about, is what your insurance allows or not. Then you also want to think about what your unit actually is. Once again, I mostly own properties in urban areas. I'm in New York and the Dominican Republic. In those, I own a lot of multifamilies and we're in very urban areas. Having a Mastiff, which in case you're not aware is a very large dog, on a fourth floor, 1,000 square foot apartment in a concrete jungle is probably not exactly going to be a good fit. So you do also want to think what's going to work in that space, because I guarantee you, you do not want all those calls from those tenants below that Mastiff at all. But it's really important to make sure that one, you understand your insurance and your responsibility as a landlord. And then two, you also think about that space and the other tenants that you're going to have in that property. So Laura, hope that helps answer your question about which breeds to stay away from. That's just pet policy in general. We get a lot of questions about service animals and ESAs. Service animals are actually a dog. They are defined as a dog itself that has been trained to perform a particular task that will help a person with a disability. So, for example, that could be somebody that, once again, I think most people think of seeing eye dogs when you think of a service animal, but this can also be somebody that has a dog that will help recognize when a person is having a seizure, that could be incredibly helpful, or also a person that has depression, where a dog can really help to alert to make sure that somebody's taking their medication. So those are service animals. Okay. There are different conditions for service animals than there are for ESAs, which are emotional support animals. Emotional support animals can really be other types of animals besides dogs. It can be dog included. And that's where that dog offers some type of benefit to a person that has a disability. Okay. So there's very, very big differences within that service animal or in an emotional support animal. We actually had one of our inner circle members, Natalie Wingfield, ask, how do you phrase pre-screening questions about animals? She wasn't sure if she should go with using pets or other animals, or what she should do about how to get information about if a person has an ESA. The reason for that is because in most situations, you cannot deny a person because they have a service animal or because they have an ESA. There are very few circumstances where you can deny an ESA or a service animal. But we have a whole different podcast all about service animals and all about ESAs. So if you've not heard that episode, make sure to go back, take a listen to that, and then come back and then listen to the rest of these questions here. With that, when you are screening people, it is important to know the situation of what they would be moving in with. It is perfectly okay to put on your pre-screening questionnaire something about ESAs. One, the proper question would always be to ask, do you have any animals? Because service animals and ESAs are not considered pets. They're still animals, but they're not considered pets. So if you said to somebody that has an ESA, do you have any pets? They would probably say no. But if you ask them, do they have any animals? They should be answering yes. Okay. So that's going to be an important distinction there. You can absolutely put on a pre-screening questionnaire. Do you have an ESA? That's going to be important for you because once again, you have to do your due diligence on what that animal is. And if that's something that you actually can accept under the regulations, state and federally. It's okay to put on a pre-screening questionnaire. That does not mean you're denying them because of the ESA. That does not mean that you're discriminating or being biased against somebody that has a disability. You are legitimately asking a question that you, as a landlord, needs an answer to, which is if they have an ESA or a service animal. And then if so, you need to be able to do your due diligence on those ESAs and service animals. So perfectly okay, Natalie, to still be able to ask that. We are not getting into the idea of we're declining people from that pre-screening questionnaire because that we cannot do, but it is absolutely okay to still ask so you have that information. Natalie, hope that helps answer your question on your pre-screening questionnaire. Next up, we have Ashley McGlasson. The applicant that she has says that they have a service dog for their son and that he's trained to detect seizures. And she goes, do I ask for some type of documentation? Ashley, you don't have to ask for documentation, but if you want to, that's also okay. With service animals and emotional support animals, what's important is that you do not ask about the person's disability. That's a big no-no, but you absolutely can ask for documentation. That's very common, especially with ESAs. They usually come with a doctor's note that has to meet certain criteria and have certain types of information within that letter. You remember with service dogs and ESAs that they do not have to have any type of formal training. So with that documentation, you really need to understand what are you looking to get at by asking for that documentation, right? Because you can't ask for documentation about somebody's medical records or a disease that they have or a disability that they have. But you absolutely can ask about information about what tasks a service dog or an ESA actually provides. Okay. That's really one of the only questions that you'll be able to ask. So just think about before asking for that documentation, what is the goal of asking for the documentation? What are you looking to get? And then make sure that that's actually something that fits within fair housing guidelines. I hope that helps. Next up, we have Katie Helm-Bolt. She's asking about ESAs for chickens in her city. She said that she saw in her local newspaper that there was an issue with a tenant that was trying to bring chickens in as an ESA. And she is asking, honestly, are there any boundaries on what ESAs can be? And are there constraints about what somebody can claim to have as an ESA? And the answer to that, Katie, is that any type of animal can be an ESA. Service dogs are dogs, but ESAs can actually be any type of animal. And I'm sure we've all heard the story about the emotional support peacock that was trying to get onto a plane and the other kind of crazy stories about this. Once again, also, mentioning chickens. But unfortunately, we are not in a place to decide what a doctor feels would be beneficial to a patient. That is not something that we can actually control. Once again, we can control what we are able to have into our property, what we are legally to have there. Once again, zoning, what's safe, what are constraints that, once again, a city insurance might have coming in and out of that property. But outside of that, actually an ESA can be any type of animal. Just wanted to make sure that we get that clear. But this is why it's really important to have that due diligence of getting the documentation from a doctor with what that animal should be and what service that animal will be able to provide as an ESA, and just making sure that all your boxes get checked there. Because unfortunately, abuse of any system does happen, and that's something that we want to be able to prevent. Our last question of the day is from Fiona Gledhill. She has a new tenant who snuck in a cat. And when she asked about that cat, they're claiming the cat is actually an ESA. She said she gave them a reasonable accommodation request form to complete, but she hadn't heard anything back. She asked again and is still not getting a response. And she asked, is there a time frame for providing documentation to a landlord? So this, unfortunately, where there's a little bit of too much of a blank space here in the law about ESAs. So just as much as you have a reasonable accommodation form, which is what landlords have to do, is to be able to make a reasonable accommodation. Also, it is absolutely on the tenant to provide that information. So unfortunately, it has not been defined of what that time frame is, but what seems to be the legal standard in most places is around 10 days, right? So figure 10 business days, you have about 2 weeks to really be able to get that information. So within that time, that's absolutely a reasonable time for somebody to be able to get the letter from the doctor that they need with the documentation to show that that cat is an ESA. After that point in time, honestly, it's really up to having that conversation with that tenant and always having great communication. Because at that point, if they're not responsive and they're not getting you the information they need, when that was something that you did not approve that cat to be there, then honestly, that's something that you might actually have to serve a cure or quit for to ensure that a cat that is not authorized to be on your property is then not on your property. Like I said at the beginning of this episode, I'm going to say again at the end of this episode, which is always make sure to speak to a local attorney when it comes to situations, especially surrounding fair housing guidelines, emotional support animals, and service animals. As your pet policy, that is something that you are absolutely in control of, but always make sure that you are taking into consideration your fair housing guidelines and that we are not discriminating against anybody in this business. Our goal as landlords should be to provide safe, clean housing to our fellow humans. And that's something that we really want to make sure that we take seriously here. If you have not, once again, go make sure to take a listen to our episode all about emotional support animals and service animals to get more clarity on what you can and cannot ask for. And we go much more into details there. Thank you very much for listening to our episode all about pet policies and service animals. Please do make sure to hit that subscribe button. And also, if you enjoyed today's episode, make sure to leave a 5-star review. We release new episodes of the Lady Landlords Podcast every single Tuesday. So make sure to be posting your questions in the Lady Landlords Facebook group, because you never know when I might just answer yours. Thank you so much, and I will see you for the next episode of the Lady Landlords Podcast. Thank you for listening to the Lady Landlords Podcast. If you're feeling stuck in your real estate investing journey, visit lady-landlord.com to book a 15-minute orientation call with me and see if you're ready to join our mentorship program. Or you can subscribe to our newsletter and join our Facebook group for exclusive real estate investing tips and offers. Invest with confidence. Become a Lady Landlord today.